thank you for joining and welcome to our Smiley Talk, Feed the Nation. So aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is zero hunger, we're going to be highlighting the organisations that are directly working to combat food poverty, as well as learning ways that individuals and communities can work to reduce food insecurity levels throughout the UK. So we have three speakers with us today. We have Ped, Izzy and Carly, and they all work in organisations that are directly working to combat food poverty. We'll hear some introductions from them and the organisations they work for very shortly. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of Smiley Movement. So we run these Smiley Talks. We are a not-profit and we're sponsored by the original Smiley brand. And everything we do is aiming to inspire people to take action and to drive forward positive change in the world. So we run these Smiley Talks. We also have a positive news website called Smiley News, and we have a podcast called Define Optimism. And with everything we do, we align with those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They're striving for a happier and healthier world, and we want to highlight the organisations and the people who are striving to achieve those goals too. So we are live streaming today on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. And wherever you're watching, if you have any questions during the hour, please put them in the comments and we will try to put them to our speakers and get through all your questions near the end of the hour. But I think it is a good chance to introduce our speakers now. So I'm going to come to you first, Ped. Could you just introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about who you are and the organisation you work for.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm Ped Iskarian. I'm Director of Feeding Bristol. We're a charity that works to tackle structural inequalities in our food system on a local level, but hopefully with further wider-reaching implications. We were originally founded in 2018 as part of a pilot of the Feeding Britain programme, and we were focused on our Mayor's initiative of No Child Goes Hungry in the city. So we spent the majority of the first 2-3 years working with a group of other organisations in the city, kind of spearheading the Healthy Holidays programme in the city. And in the absence of government funding, we raised funds around about £150,000 on an annual basis to help run holiday activities and marry that with food provision over the summer months. And that really kind of was all about collaboration and co-creation, and we work very closely with FareShare Southwest, the Playful Bristol, and the youth sector in the city, as well as working with the council. Since the pandemic, we've been much more focused on addressing some of the kind of, or having a greater understanding of the wider issues of food insecurity, food inequality in the city, and working with a wider group of communities, or addressing food provision for the wider community. And over the last 2 years, we've led on a citywide project, engaging over 70 organisations in creating a food equality strategy for Bristol, which is actually just been signed off by the City Council, and is going to be launching at a Food Justice Week, which we're gonna have on the 20th of June in Bristol, which is all about letting people know about the strategy and how they can get involved in tackling issues of food justice in the city, but also just creating a much stronger conversation around the city, around the issues that we're facing in some of the more vulnerable communities and wards. And we have real disparity in Bristol, where you can have wards where you've got a high level of affluence, and then you can travel, half a mile, and you're suddenly in massive poverty. And some of the wards that rank highest in the indices of multiple deprivation in the country. So there's a real awareness building that's to be built up around that. Prior to working at Feeding Bristol, spent the best part of the last 10 years working in the local food system and running a social enterprise called the Community Farm, which is all about getting organic veg boxes out to people, but also engaging with people on site, doing social therapeutic horticulture, teaching people about food, where it comes from, re-engaging with the land, and also creating routes to market for organic growers in the region.
Fantastic, thank you. You've got a lot of knowledge there to share, and also it sounds like a lot going on in Bristol with Feeding Bristol. Izzy, I'll come to you next. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the organisation you work for?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Amy. My name is Izzy. I am the Deputy Manager at Roots for Life. We're a new charity based out of a newly built community centre in South East London. So we are fortunate enough to have 8.5 acres of land, a newly built community centre with a teaching kitchen, a wildlife pond, There's space for some football fields. We're currently looking at rewilding part of the area as well. And our aim is to equip people with the tools to help them live more healthily. So we offer cooking courses, we offer exercise, things to help, an integrated approach for well-being. We've got allotments, we've got growing beds, and a teaching kitchen. So it's a holistic approach to tackling food insecurity. Trying to think what we've been doing recently. We teach, thanks to Charlton Athletic, 2 lots of cooking lessons a week to 10 to 14-year-olds. These are free for everybody. We are, like PED, we're also funded for the holiday and activities programs, which have been really beneficial for all of our beneficiaries. And we're also working with the Co-op at the moment to develop a community fridge where people can come and pick up meals and food that we have produced if they're in need. So we like it to be, as well as sort of we're not a food bank, but we are going to become a bit of a grow bank where people can come if they need to. But also we want it to be a place that people can learn the skills and take them away themselves. And education is quite an important part of what we're doing here.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Carly, I'll come to you next. So did you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your organisation?
Hi, so I'm Carly. I'm the head of marketing at the charity Food Cycle. We have been running now for 12 years and we are currently in 49 different locations across the country. And the premise of what we do is we have a team of amazing volunteers who turn surplus food into meals for anyone that needs them. So each meal runs every week in the same venue, and we see a huge variety of people that kind of come and use our services. Something that we really, really pride ourselves on is we don't ask any questions. We don't ask the reason that you're coming. So we'll see people that may be homeless. We might see low-income families. We might have refugees. It's really kind of a melting pot of kind of different cultures and people for coming for different reasons. And we're all about, we've got 3 kind of main aims that we're doing. So we're saving surplus food, which is obviously really important. There's so much food going to waste, but we're turning it into good. But we're also tackling loneliness and helping bring the community together. So it's a 3-course meal. So we also say we're very different from a food bank. We're very much about that whole experience, about engaging, about meeting your community. All the meals are vegetarian, so they're open to all cultures and all backgrounds. And they're full of nutrition. So that's a big thing that we see from the people that we support, is actually they can't afford to buy what we may think is your everyday item, like bananas, which always kind of amazes me that we're in a situation like that. So it's kind of part education as well, because people are trying new fruit and veg. And also we try and send everybody home with any food we have left over, so they'll get bags of food that they can take to then turn into meals later on in the week. And we're growing all the time. So we opened in Swansea 2 days ago. We've got 4 more in the pipeline. By the end of the year, I think we're going to be at around 55 to 57. So we're seeing huge demand in our services at the moment. So yeah, that's us. That's Food Cycle.
Wow, great that you're expanding, but also I just sort of to kick things off wanted to touch on what you just said there about you're seeing a huge demand. So sort of to contextualize this talk and talk about the issue before we go into the solutions. Food poverty itself is a global issue, but specifically in the UK, I was looking at data earlier this week, and the Food Foundation released stats in February of this year, and it basically said food insecurity levels are continuing to rise. And obviously, with the cost of living crisis, I'm increasingly seeing stories, and I'm sure you've probably seen them too, where people are having to choose between paying for their bills or having 3 meals a day, reducing the amount of meals they have a day to be able to pay for their bills. So just to sort of start with, to contextualize, like I said, the issue of food poverty and its sort of increase in demand, I wonder if we could talk a bit about what are the factors that are increasing this demand. Like, it is happening in the UK, but it's actually happening globally. Why is this happening? And I'm sure there are loads of reasons and things that come together that make it such a sort of bad sight at the moment. But Peda, maybe I'll come to you first. Can you shed light on some of the reasons why the demand is increasing? Aside from over the past 5 years, I think it has been steadily increasing.
Yeah, I think there are some obviously very obvious reasons that you mentioned now in the current circumstances. We're looking at the cost of living crisis, but I think we mustn't lose sight that this has been a problem that's been increasing over the last decade, and longer in fact. Food banks have been around for a long time, sometimes in the different guises, different names, but they've always been in situ. And then the last 10 years, we've seen quite a big increase in issues around poverty. We do have very obvious issues around access to nutritious food, affordability of food, and issues around skills and resources. Perhaps in this country in particular, we've seen a strong change in food culture over the last, let's say, 20, 30, 40 years. In fact, perhaps due to issues around our buying habits, work-life balance, spending too much time at work, not spending enough time at home and actually preparing foods or learning how to prepare foods or passing on skills. I think for myself, my family, my parents came over in the late 70s from Iran, kind of refugees of the Iranian Revolution, and growing up in the 80s in Bath, and very, very interesting sort of juxtaposition with my friends. My parents had a very strong food culture. It was all about eating family meals in the evening, very, very much based on produce and food and cooking. But already that was quite a contrast to many of my friends I was growing up with, who you were seeing their families are already moving in terms of what they're eating and how they're eating and how they're engaging as a family unit. So I think there are some really deep set problems that go back quite a long way that we have to address. I think we also really have to be careful not to look at the issue of food poverty in silo. It's linked to poverty. We have an issue in this country. In the last decade alone, we've seen the richest fifth and the poorest fifth, the gap between them continuing to increase, actually increase at quite a large rate. The richest fifth in our society has seen an increase of almost 6% in income over that period, whilst the poorest fifth have actually seen a decrease of nearly 5%. In the last 3 years alone, we've seen a decrease of, or the 3 years to the pandemic, we've seen a decrease of 12% for the poorest fifth. Wow. So we're in a situation where the poorest fifth in our society, we have almost a fifth, I think that was being reported by the Joseph Rowntree report earlier this year, that the poorest fifth are now living below the poverty line in this country. That's like an equivalent household income of barely £20,000 for a household. So if you've got a family of four living on that kind of income, if you put your rent together, if you put your utilities bills together, and you put your food that you need in to feed a family of four properly, nutritionally, you're already reaching £20,000 a year. So we can see the issue that we're already having in the affordability and the wider issues of poverty, employment, pay, and the gap between the richest and the poorest in our society. So I think when it comes to understanding the factors, we really have to make sure we're looking at the wider picture and ensuring that we put everything contextualized amongst that, and think about, when we come on later to talk about some of the solutions, about how those solutions sit along the other kind of strategies, the other issues of how we're tackling poverty, fuel poverty in this country.
Yeah, you're right. It can never just be sat alone. And my colleague, actually, when we were talking about food poverty earlier, was saying the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, number 1 is no poverty, number 2 is zero hunger. They are interlinked, and it's completely right to say we can't sort of talk about them in silo. Carly, what about you? Is obviously Ped's covered quite a lot there. Is there anything that you would say sort of a contributing factor to why these levels are consistently increasing?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ped covered it really well. I'm not sure how much I can kind of add to that, but I think, I think us as organisations, none of us are really seeing the true impact, because actually one of the things, I think there's still a huge amount of stigma around it. So people are afraid to access services. So I don't think we've seen the full picture yet. For us at Food Cycle, we've seen a change in the people that come. Whilst we don't ask questions, obviously we speak to them, and our volunteers, we find out the reasons that people are coming, and that's changed a lot over the past couple of years. Obviously with the pandemic, people that weren't classing themselves in poverty, because of the pandemic or because of long-term illness, because of COVID, there's an additional people. So people were struggling already, but this is just doubled on top. And then with the increase of bills and etc. So we ask our guests every year, we do a survey, an anonymous survey. In November last year, over 60% were already struggling to pay their bills. So I can't even begin to imagine what that figure is going to be come next November.
When I keep hearing and try to avoid the news sometimes, but bills are going to go up even more in October. They've gone up so much, they're going to go up even more. And it's just, you're sort of waiting to see what is going to be done about this, because it just can't go on. One thing I was going to ask next, and Izzy, I'll come to you, is sort of a bit about your experience. And Ped, you touched on it earlier, but what was it that made you you're all working in organisations that are directly helping people in need. Did you want to share a bit of your experience, perhaps, of why did you want to work? I mean, obviously it's hugely helpful, but what was it? Was there a specific reason or story that made you think I really want to work and help combat food poverty, and sort of coming across organisations like yours and Roots for Life? What was your journey to get in there?
Yeah, so it's been quite a long journey, actually. I don't know whether any of you remember Jamie Oliver's School Dinners. I think it was on TV in 2005. And I remember seeing that and being horrified. And my dad is a doctor, he's a medic. He wrote his thesis on diet-related diseases. And it all sort of started to click into my head and became an interest. And then I worked at an education charity whose aim was to bridge the attainment gap, and going to things like the school food plan roundtables and APPGs on childhood obesity. And then I realized this is the area that I need to be in. Did a chef's qualification, and have slowly begun to move into this area.
Yeah, no, I very much remember Jamie Oliver's school meals, and feel like that started a lot of the conversation nationally. What about you, Ped? So you said that you actually, before Feed in Bristol, ran a social enterprise with the veg boxes. Is that what made you sort of want to progress in this area?
Well, I suppose you go back to a university. I studied environmental sciences. After spending many years working in the food industry, I was a bit like, I should be doing something much more worthwhile with my life, and just sort of quit my job and was like, right, I've got to find something in a more ethical sector. And at heart, I've always been a bit of a social and environmental activist. And the situation we have around food, everyone has a right to food, and the fact that that's not the case, the fact that people struggle for that is just not acceptable in our society today. In a country that is, one of the fifth, sixth richest country in the world, to think that that's the situation that we're in, and that we're not looking after people appropriately enough, properly, and that the access isn't there in such it's just wrong. And that's the thing that gets me up every morning. That's the thing that drives me into work, and that's what I'm really passionate about. So yeah, it's almost a bit of a no-brainer to be working here right now.
Yeah, and when you put it simply like that, everyone has a right to food. It's so true, and it really makes you stop and think. It's times like this where I just think, I obviously love finding solutions and speaking to people who are have organisations dedicated to this. But you start to think, what more can we do? Because obviously, right now, it's not working. It's slowly sort of starting to change. So, and Carly, what about you? Did sort of in your journey with Food Cycle, and obviously it's hugely expanding, has that been something you've long been passionate about?
Well, I guess, yeah, I've only been working kind of in food, I guess, for the past 2 years. So it was a bit of a weird backwards journey, I guess, to kind of get where I am now. So I've worked in marketing commercially for years. I moved to the charity sector about 10 years ago. And actually it was kind of just by chance that I found Food Cycle. And I'm a big food lover. I'm really passionate about saving surplus food, about eating healthy, nutritious food. And I love people as well, just helping people, being around people, hence why I was working in the industry. And so when I came across Food Cycle, I just love the values. It's not just about tackling food poverty, but it's about bringing people together and the impact that has on people as well, and people's mental health, and all a big knock-on effect. And I do remember before my interview going to one of the meals and just thinking, wow, this is just phenomenal. So I always say you can never fully explain a Food Cycle experience until you've seen it and you've witnessed it, because whilst we're tackling something that is really a major issue, and there's a lot of stigma, people are really embarrassed by it. When you go to a meal, I get goosebumps when I talk about it, actually. That's how much passionate I am about Food Cycle. there's just such an amazing atmosphere in the room because people feel relaxed. They're in a safe space. They're getting the food that they so desperately need, but they're meeting other people and they don't feel alone. And there's laughter and there's friendships made between the volunteers and the people that we're supporting. So it's just, for me, an amazing organisation to be a part of, because it's tackling so many different issues, when at the core it's kind of food poverty, but there's many more things that we're helping make people feel much better.
Yeah, and it seems that's similar with all of your organisations. It's not just about, obviously it's tackling food poverty, but it's also has the ripple effect of educating people, raising awareness and tackling poverty itself. We obviously spoke about the reasons, like over the past 10, 20, 30 years, the reasons why food poverty has increased. But I was just wondering, over the past 5 years, have you within your organisation seen any sort of shift or change, and whether that's more people being aware or sort of local councils getting involved more or more volunteers? Have you sort of seen any sort of shift to help sort of achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is combating food poverty? Is that been clear? I don't know if that's sort of been something you've noticed in Feeding Bristol.
I think the pandemic has had obviously a massive impact on food insecurity in this country, and the way that people came together during that period to tackle a lot of the issues. Feeding Bristol was working with many different organisations, very much on a strategic level in the city, working with the council to tackle the issues. We're quite lucky, I think, in Bristol with the way that the council is structured. It's quite they take quite a collaborative stance. I suppose if you're going to be a cynic, you say they were outsourcing a lot of the work, but I think it invites a lot of very varied opinions into some of the solutions that we're trying to create, or really understanding how we understand the problems that we're facing. And we have what's called a one city approach at the city office, and that means that you have these different boards that allow a lot of different organisations, from the VCSE sector, community organisations, all the way through to businesses, to be involved in some of the strategies that we're taking. I think we've certainly seen in Bristol massive increases in the children that are eligible for free school meal vouchers in the city. It's risen by 20% in the last two and a half years. So we're somewhere around about just over 16,000 children. Over around 26% of the children in this city are now eligible for free school meal vouchers, and a lot of that has been directly impacted by the pandemic. I think one of the things that we've really learned during the pandemic is we've seen lots of really great research coming out over the last couple of years. You mentioned stuff by the Food Foundation, you mentioned Joseph Rowntree report, but there's lots of organisations who are trying to understand the situation. And as a consequence, we're learning how to better provide support for a lot of the issues that perhaps were hidden at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, we spend a lot, we talk a lot about the HAF project was mentioned earlier, and the holiday hunger for children. But actually, there was a lot of hidden food insecurity amongst a variety of different communities, be it disabled community, people that are homeless, refugees, asylum seekers in Bristol as well. And actually, we had to come. The original kind of response to the pandemic was, you scale up what you're doing around food provision around the city, but the reality was that food provision wasn't fit for purpose for everyone that needed the help. And we've had to really adapt the way that we're working to say, okay, what is appropriate food for refugees and asylum seekers? What is the nutritional content that people that are homeless needing, and how do we get food to them that's effective? What are the resources they have available to them? What perhaps even it's a very different approach when you're working with people with disabilities, a whole range of different disabilities, and understanding what are the challenges that they're facing, the challenges that existed before the pandemic happened, for many of these different groups, these communities of interest. But we've certainly learned a lot more in the last 2-3 years of the situations going on, understanding some of the hidden issues and how we're going to deal with them.
Yeah, so really tailoring your approach. And I feel like that's just something a lot of people might not have thought of. They're thinking about food poverty as these people need food, so you're going to provide it. But those sort of taking into account accessibility is super important for people to know about as well. It's
difficult. I don't want to offend too many people here, but there can be a certain white saviorism around how we work in charity. And I think that needs to be very much recognised and understanding. You can't just give a load of food to someone and just be like, well, I've given you food, you should just be thankful. Actually, the support needs to be appropriate and it needs to fix the problem. If you're not understanding what the problem is in the first place, you're providing a solution which is of no use to anyone. So I think that's something, and I appreciate some terms like this can really get people's hackles up and make them very defensive. But one of the things that we need to do is learn how to have difficult conversations in a comfortable manner as a society. There are things that will be said that will offend people, that will make people feel a bit defensive. But if we don't start having those or creating safe spaces to have those conversations, then we'll never start creating the right sort of solutions to solve the problems.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like raising awareness, like talking about it now, but also having that education and the space to feel like you can learn, like the open space to ask questions and learn from it. And Izzy, what about you? Have you sort of over the past 5 years seen much difference? I mean, since obviously Roots for Life is quite new, but since it's been launched, has there been much of a change in people's sort of interest in the demand, in the volunteers, or awareness of your organisation within South East London?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are very new, but we were running just before the pandemic began. We had to take a halt with taking over at the community centre, but we started cooking and delivering meals to people who were shielding. And I think the thing that a lot of people who donated so that we were able to do that didn't realise is that has continued and it hasn't stopped now. Like the pandemic, yes, has sort of petered off, but the demand is still very much there. It hasn't disappeared at all. And as we all know, it's on the rise. I mean, the local food banks that we do work with can't keep up with their demand at the moment. And are sending more and more people to the community meals that we do, and we're trying to donate food that we get, say, from the Felix Project, that we can't use to them. But yeah, I mean, the demand is just increasing. I do think that the awareness is also going up. I think people like Marcus Rashford doing that campaign that was responsible for getting the holiday activity funding in has really helped. But we've got quite a long way to go, I think.
And Carly, you said earlier the same, the demand for Food Cycle is huge. You're expanding to open more sites in Swansea and more towards the end of the year. But you're also volunteer run. So have you been able to keep up with the demand of people accessing Food Cycle to get enough volunteers to sort of help you run that service?
Yeah, luckily. I mean, it has its ups and downs, which I'm sure the other organisations will realise the pandemic really kind of changed all sorts of things, because we had a big shift in who was volunteering, who couldn't, and then people were furloughed and then they weren't. And so there's been it's constant recruitment when it comes to volunteers, because everybody's life is still changing. So actually that's been quite a big challenge for us, is, how can we attract volunteers that have the time to support us and as we expand. But I think Ped covered and Izzy really covered kind of the negative kind of things that have changed over the past 5 years. But I think from a positive side of things, I think the pandemic really highlighted those issues around, food poverty. So more people are aware of it. And I think more people are coming together, more charities are working together. There's more organisations doing stuff. We've attracted more corporate partners just because more people are talking about it. And what we find is the more people that talk about it, it breaks down the stigma. So you have a different people feeling more confident to cross the line. So whilst, it's awful, there's these issues, but actually the awareness that the pandemic has raised means that people know that there's a service out there. We've got more corporates willing to kind of donate, whether it's food or whether it's money. So I think that's really, really changed over the past few years. And that's what's helping us expand. So we've always known that there's loads and loads of, towns and cities that would really benefit from our service. And it's because of the awareness raised during the pandemic that we've got additional funding, that there's more trusts and funds that are willing to donate, that helps us all expand. And I'm sure that Izzy and Ped will be finding this, the same things happening.
No, it's good to see the positive angles, because obviously there's the element of these levels rising, but knowing that there's awareness, there are people willing to come forward to sort of support. And what I wanted to ask next is sort of what we want to focus on is what solutions really help. So you all work directly within the organisation, so you do the work, but you can also see the impact. This is a really big question, saying what solutions really work. Are there any sort of case studies that you've seen from other countries, from other communities or towns or cities where they are implementing a service that is making a difference, or any specific solutions or projects that you've worked on that you can see is potentially the way to go forward and to grow and expand? Ped, I'll come back to you. Is that in terms of those really focusing on the solutions, what would you highlight there?
I think there are some amazing innovative projects all around the country, around the world that are tackling these issues and have been for many years. As we learn more, as I mentioned, the amount of research that's going on the last few years is allowing us to really understand what the problem is, and that allows us to make better solutions and more inventive solutions that are really tailored for different communities. So, as I mentioned earlier, in Bristol we have we sort of highlight around about 13, 14 wards in the city that are most at risk of high levels of food insecurity. And each one of those areas, you need to think about quite specifically what is going on in this locality, what is the makeup of the locality, what is the kind of provision and support that's going to need to be best created or supported to support those that are in need. I think as well, you have to then start thinking about communities of interest, like I mentioned, and again, what are the kind of support that those that are homeless, those that are refugees or asylum seekers, what support do they need, and how can we best provide that in a way that is that each one of them takes a slightly different approach to it. In Bristol, we're incredibly fortunate to have some fantastic organisations that really specialise in supporting some of the different areas and getting to the different hard to reach communities. And that can be a whole variety of different approaches. We have food clubs in the city, which are we brought to Bristol 3 years ago almost now, and they've got 12 of them in the city. It's a national thing actually, food clubs now, and they're all around a small financial transaction that returns a 15-16 pounds worth of food on a weekly basis for people, and works with a fair share model directly. We've got Food Cycle in Bristol, which do an amazing job. We work quite closely with them. There can be pay it forward schemes are really interesting and inventive and way of using both for veg box schemes, or there's a really good one in Heart of BS13, which is a local community organisation in Bristol that do a real meal store, which is all about creating food, and local residents can pay it forward so others can access it at low or subsidised costs. And with those sort of schemes as well, you're starting to create a better level of dignity that comes. It was touched on earlier around the stigma that comes with food provision, and how if someone's just turning up somewhere to get some food, there can be a lot of stigma attached to it. But if you can create something that's centered around communities that creates really positive spaces for people to come and they mix with other people, they learn from each other, they realize that there's support in the community for a whole variety of different issues, and taking more of a holistic approach to support. So you can go to your local community centre. You can access subsidised, affordable food. It can be food that's really nutritious and healthy. It can be about community eating, which has also been touched on earlier, which is a really fantastic way to get people together, share stories, share food, share recipes. Then there's the way that we have to think about how we're changing issues around the skills that we have as a society, looking at food education throughout. We run a project called the Children's Kitchen, which is focused on early years settings, and it's all about teaching children aged 2 to 5 years old about food, cooking food, but not solely about cooking food. It's more about a positive experience with food. So it's about getting children to grow in raised beds that we put into the sites in the nursery schools. And then the kids can feel the veg, touch the veg, taste the veg, and create a positive interaction with that. And what we want to see is that kind of level of interaction carrying on through primary school, secondary school, and then we have to think about how we have to tailor approaches to adult learning, and create spaces for people to be able to access the facilities to cook. Not everybody has a kitchen at home, not everybody has it at home, and you need to have community spaces where people can go. We had some really interesting conversations with the homeless community last year, where we were discussing with them what they want to see, and they're like, I just want somewhere to go where I can actually cook food, and cook food in a way where somebody's not trying to sell me drugs as well. And that's something we've not heard before. That's something we need to feed back to organisations working in this area. So it's about really taking a joined up, collaborative, co-productive approach with a whole range of organisations and community projects, all the way up to businesses and local authorities working together to solve the problems. And that's something perhaps we've not always done so well in the past, but I think the pandemic's really opened the door to that way of working, and we just need to pick that ball up and run with it now. Because if we drop it and we go back to how we were operating in silos before, then we'll just start going backwards.
No, that's so interesting. I love the idea of collaboration, community. And like you said, and you touched on this earlier, having those community spaces where people can come and, like you said, yes, the food is a service, but they can also interact. And that is tackling issues like social isolation and loneliness. I mean, it's Mental Health Awareness Week this week, and we're seeing a lot about the need for communities to come together for a range of reasons. And like you said, can remove some of the stigma. Izzy, I know you said earlier you actually take that holistic approach. You've got a pond and kitchens at Roots for Life. Would you say the same in terms of like tackling solutions? It is about that holistic approach, community, and collaborating with others.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of solving food poverty and is bringing people together, and that's not the only thing that we're helping. Like you said, it helps social isolation, it helps with health, it helps with the way that we have disconnected from our food and the environment. All of these factors are sort of sewn together in a web, and by what I think all of our organisations are doing is starting with one, but it actually is having an effect on lots of other things as well.
And have you seen the impact of people coming to Roots for Life to learn to cook, to learn skills about cooking, learning about healthy eating? Have you seen the impact that has had on their own way of sort of experiencing food in their home?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we have from the Holiday Hunger Programme, the kids absolutely love being in the garden and the cooking sessions. They sort of bound in every morning asking what they're going to be doing today, and it's like wonderful to see. And we've already seen sort of significant weight loss with some children, and people coming back to our community meals, wanting to get in the garden, coming to volunteer. Interaction between all of the ages as well, which is really lovely. Yeah. So yeah, definitely, we really have.
Amazing. And Carly, sort of focusing on those solutions and looking at what really works, whether you've seen models elsewhere or things have really worked within Food Cycle, what would you say? And I think that what Ped said about collaboration is super important, and is
Ped couldn't have said that more perfectly, actually. He said everything I was thinking, which was great. And I think, that's another thing that I really like kind of about working in this arena. Like there isn't any kind of sense of competitiveness. Like there's so much collaboration, and we work with so many different organisations when we go into like a new town or a city. So whether that's, surplus food, or we'll always make sure that we're, that our service isn't running on the same day as another service. And, there's lots of work that kind of goes on around that. And we would never launch in a town or city until we've really spoken to as many kind of organisations in that area. And everybody is just really supportive of each other. And it's about, we do a lot of signposting, a service that we launched as part of the pandemic. To help kind of with the loneliness side is making weekly calls to people, which we now continue to do on top of our meals, but we use that to signpost people to other services in the area. So I think it's really important because, for Food Cycle, we can only provide one meal a week, really, realistically, how our model runs. But people need to eat more than one day a week. And some people are only eating one day a week, or actually eating healthy, nutritious food. So again, collaboration is absolutely key in this area, and learning from each other. I thought it was really interesting, Ped saying earlier about the different kind of foods that people need, depending on their situation. And there's probably some more learnings that we can do at Food Cycle around that. So that's really kind of interesting all the time, is kind of talking to people and and finding out how we can work together. I think a really key thing that we hear from our guests, and I don't ever want to knock anything that anybody is doing, but I think there's quite a barrier sometimes where you have to go through means testing. So there are some food banks, for instance, where you have to have a referral, you might have to answer questions and the reasons that you need it. I think for me, I don't know if it's possible, but I'd love to see that taken away. That I really think that's a huge barrier, and I know that's a lot of people that use our services use it for that reason. And during the pandemic, we were supporting a lot of people because they were falling through the gaps because they didn't tick the right boxes.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's a really key thing that we hear quite a lot from the people that we support. And I think as many organisations as possible will try not to do that. But I think that will be kind of a key factor kind of going forward.
It's interesting. One of the questions that has been asked actually is, and we've all touched on it a bit there, you just did then, is the stigma. Someone has said, I know people can be nervous about going to a food bank for the first time. What would you suggest? So for people who potentially, especially within this crisis of the cost of living now, are finding themselves needing to have that support, would any of you, I'll come back to you first, Carly, but would you have any advice, potentially, if they do, maybe they don't know that at Food Cycle you aren't asked any questions, or maybe they have something else in their local area where they are potentially asked questions, or they just aren't sure what they'll be asked. What advice would you give to someone in that situation, or someone who is supporting someone in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really easy for us to say, just go and give it a go, because actually, having not been in that situation myself, I know it's tough to cross that barrier, but I really would say just try, come along with a friend or another family member. You don't have to kind of come on your own. I don't know too much about the exact process for a food bank, but specifically talking at Food Cycle, sometimes what we'll offer to do, if you're feeling a bit uneasy, our volunteers are honestly just so friendly. They really make Food Cycle is you can come in and have a cup of tea for the first time, and if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to come back, or you can just come and check out kind of what's going on. That's what we try and do as much as possible, is making people just feel welcome, and that's one of the reasons that we're kind of open to everybody as well. So we have people come for different reasons. We have some people that come because it's not because they can't afford to buy food, it's because they're really lonely and they want someone to talk to. So some people might just tell us that that's the reason they're coming, when actually the reality is that they can't afford to buy food. So we find that helps break down some barriers. We also have our volunteers, what's quite unique, our volunteers eat. We encourage our volunteers to eat when they're volunteering with us, so they sit down with the guests and have a conversation. So we often have people come and volunteer instead, because they know that they'll get a meal instead, and that helps them cross the barrier. So it would just be, don't be afraid to talk to other people. Don't be afraid to kind of see what is out there. We know that it might take time, but we'll be there whenever you're ready to kind of cross that line.
That's great. And Izzy, what about you, with people who potentially want to engage with Roots for Life, with the range of things that you're doing, but are nervous to take that first step? What advice would you give?
Just that generally these charitable organisations like Roots for Life and Food Cycle and Feeding Bristol, the people that are running them are there to help and want to help. And we, like Food Cycle, don't have any parameters that people need to fit into. It's not going to the council and having to fill in 1 million forms and beg and explain any of your situation. We're all places that want to help, and everybody there, like Carly said, all the volunteers will always make you feel at home. So it may seem daunting, but again, I think Carly summed it up really well. If you can make the first step, or pick up the phone first, or just drop in and have a cup of tea, you're definitely going to come back. We're all here to help, is what I would say. And
I think you three having these conversations and talking openly about what your organisation does and how it wants to encourage people to not feel that stigma is a step forward to making people aware that it's not, if they have no idea what's going to sort of face them when they first go to a food bank or something similar. Hopefully those sort of expectations are changed and they don't think they're going to be questioned about why they're there. We have had a few more questions, but I just wanted to bring back to focusing on the solutions. We spoke about sort of how organizations can help drive forward combating these rising levels. But what about individuals? And when I ask this question, I never want to, it's not down to the individual, but there are individuals out there who feel helpless, who want to do something about it, who are aware of how collective action can make a difference. So if someone's watching this and sort of hearing the stats that we're talking about and realizing it's a bigger issue than they potentially realized, and they want to get involved, what would you say would be beneficial for someone? But even as a starting point, potentially it's about reading about their local area or finding out what there is. Ped, I'll come to you. What sort of individual action tips or advice would you give to someone?
I think, yes, it's difficult. It's got to be really, you really need to understand what's going on in your area, what the need is in your area. What we try to do at Feeding Bristol is we'll get plenty of people getting in touch with us saying, how can I help? And the first thing we'll do is ask, well, where do you live? And what, and if we know where you live, then we can say, look, there's these organizations in this area. They really benefit from your help. Go to them, ask them the help they need. Understand the help that's needed as well. So sometimes, again, it's a classic thing that we probably all experience, all three of us working in this area, where you'll get like corporates will get in touch and I'll be like, oh yeah, like we'd like to do some volunteering for you. Do you want us to look at your accounts or do this or do the marketing for you? And you're like, actually, I've got those, I could do those things. What I need you to do is this sort of thing. So really going somewhere to listen and understand what the help is needed and how you can best apply yourself. That's really helpful. I think individuals can stand up and make a point and make an issue. Go to your local MPs, your local councillors, talk about the issues, raise it, make sure it's important to them so that they can take it back and they can either go back to their local authorities, their cabinets, their local council cabinets, or go to the pressure builds on the government to perhaps release more funding to be able to enable organizations to start having a bigger impact. That we were flooded with funding over the pandemic. That significantly dried up around the country, and we're seeing organizations now starting to struggle for funding to be able to support those they need to do. And if you want to get involved in terms of donating, again, it's understand what it is that people want to have donated. It's not always just about. I sometimes walk past the food bins in supermarkets, and they see what they're like. Oh, we want more baked beans, and we want more. I think, what is that the things that people really want? That's not exactly what I'm hearing from the conversation I'm having. So really understanding what if you are going to donate, if it's going to be time, if it's going to be food, or if it's going to be money, where you want to put that money, how you can help your organizations, and what's going to have the biggest impact. And taking the time to go and listen is sometimes the most important thing you can do. Yeah,
that's really interesting. What you've just said about learning what to donate, it reminds me, when I do my local food shop, they have sort of the donation area, and there are always so many tins of baked beans. And I heard about this new app. It's a charity app called Bank the Food, and I think they're expanding, but they're collaborating with local food banks to sort of ping someone to their phone when they go into a supermarket to say your local food bank requests this, because they were hearing a lot of food banks have, way too much baked beans but not enough toilet roll, and there was that imbalance, so the food that was being donated wasn't as helpful as it could be. So I think it's really interesting what you say about listening as well, and really understanding rather than just putting out the blanket.
Often people come up with ideas and they think it's like, oh my god, I've had this idea of how I can help, and having never worked in the sector before, they think they're an absolute genius, they've hit the nail on the head. But what they need to do is take the time to find out what's going on, and then they realize, oh, there's several people already doing that. The last thing you want to do is create layers upon layers upon layers. It's actually, how do I sit in with that, and how do I work with what's already happening to enhance it? That way we work efficiently and effectively to solve the problems.
Unlike what we were saying earlier, that collaboration, rather than just going in with an idea, what else is being done? What gap can be filled, rather than doubling up? Carly, what about you when it comes to sort of individual action? Is there any advice that you would give to people who are sort of, or even a community or a family, or some people who want to sort of help but aren't working within an organisation or aren't in a position of power?
Yeah, again, I think Ped covered it really well. And I was chuckling away at all the sorts of requests that we kind of get coming in, and I could do this. And it's like, could you just volunteer at a project? Actually, that's the most beneficial thing to us. So, like Ped touched on, is just find out what's going on in your local community already. Obviously, I think during the pandemic, loads of people set off and did their own thing here, there and everywhere. But I think definitely the first step is find out what's already happening, because things are changing kind of all the time. And with the pandemic, that people always need, we need volunteers constantly. We have a big turnover of volunteers for various different reasons. We're opening new projects all the time. So it's so valuable for us to have regular volunteers that can come, whether it's once every 3 months or once every week. That's really, really valuable to us at Food Cycle as an organisation. So as Ped said, listen to what's needed and see what's already happening in your community, because actually, you know, your support or your 1 day a week volunteering could really, really make quite a big impact, rather than going off and doing something that's, you know, your wonderful idea. I think the other thing is talking about it and sharing it. So if you feel passionate about this, you know, follow charities and organizations that are doing stuff in your area and share their content, so your friends and your family can see it, so they can help and they can get involved. Or it all, again, it's breaking, the big thing that we're working around Food Cycle is breaking down that stigma about who can access these services, because people think, oh, I can't, you know, I work full time, so therefore I can't access a service like this. Well, yes, you can, because if you need help, it doesn't matter what the reason, we're here to help. So I think sharing content, talking about it, and the more we talk about it, the more we, you know, a big thing that we use is kind of case studies, which a lot of people don't want to come forward and talk about the reasons that they do, that they need to access these services. But those that do are really, really passionate about it. So, for instance, we've had NHS workers, because they can't, in the pandemic, they couldn't afford it. You know, we've had professionals that have some people that, I'm a fallen professional, or, you know, they're just a family who just can't afford to cook a decent meal, so they bring their family once a week so they can sit down and share a nice meal together. There's so many reasons that people come, and the more and more we talk about it, the more and more it will break down that stigma, and everybody will feel a bit more comfortable to kind of cross the line. So that, for me, is a really big important thing. It's just talking and sharing information and content.
Yeah. And the power of social media, like we see things that our friends share, and it makes you think and find out things that you don't know about. So there can be that positive side of raising awareness, especially within your own circles. Izzy, I saw you smiling and nodding when Ped and Carly were talking about these volunteer requests. If someone wanted to help out at Roots for Life, what would like an ideal request to help out be for you, rather than someone just saying, I can do this? What would be really helpful for your charity? Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, you have. Well, as we have a group of about 10 volunteers at the moment who are wonderful in that they let us tell them where they're needed. So we have a lot of people giving us ideas, and we have to take those slowly because we're very, very small and growing. Growing slowly. But yeah, we are actually very lucky with our volunteers who do come and ask where they are needed. Particularly for us at the moment, it's the kitchen, because as Ped said, the funding that's coming in is drying up a bit. So we need people to come and help us once, say, the Felix Project deliver food, to help us chop it up, prepare it, freeze it, get it ready for when the meals are going to be made, or get it ready for a cooking lesson, or to come and help wash up. So at this moment in time, that's very useful for us. We're about to start garden volunteer mornings, but we've got a bit more funding in that at the moment. So anyone who's interested in the kitchen side of things, get in touch.
I guess it's about being open and flexible. And from what you've all said, there are specific needs at specific times. So volunteers who are able to say, I want to help, what help do you need, is more beneficial than people saying, I can do something specific that potentially won't be beneficial for your charity at that time. We've got a few minutes left.
Amy, can I just also add something to be aware of if you're going to volunteer? I think we sometimes don't. If you're going to volunteer on the front line in organisations that are directly working with those in real need, you need to be really aware of some of the emotional trauma that comes with it as well. And those organisations working with them have to think about the safeguarding that comes with that, because there are skills and tools that you need to be able to deal with it when you have people turning up, and sometimes the conversations that happen as a consequence of the situations that people in. It can be really upsetting, and it can really impact you. And I think that's something that people need to be. It's not just about, hey, I want to go help out and do something good, and I'm going to ultimately feel a bit better about doing so. There's going to be a real journey you're going to go on as well, and you're going to see things that you probably don't always see in your everyday life. And I think that's something to be really aware of.
Yeah, no, I think that's important, and sort of going into it, having the awareness of what the volunteering opportunity will be, and if you are going to have those conversations, to know and learn about how to deal with them is important. I don't know how many questions we'll get through, but someone is a student has asked, what about students who are, to be honest, this could be for anyone who is struggling. They've asked for tips on making food on a budget. So I don't know who might want to pick this up, but Izzy, I know you do sort of food education. Do you have any tips for anyone really? Because I feel like this would apply to a lot of people, especially in this situation of the cost of living crisis, students as well, but people who are looking to sort of reduce the amount they spend on a weekly shop, but still try and keep it nutritious.
Yeah, so it's really hard. I'm going to signpost to Jack Monroe and her website and her cookery books to start with. If you haven't heard of her, then please look her up. She's done wonderful work on cooking on a budget, from tin cans and to lots of other things, like 99p meals. I'm very passionate about the freezer. If you get, most vegetables that you get if you shop can be frozen and used again, and that's when they're going to keep their highest nutritional content as well. However, I realise now that sort of not everyone has access to a freezer, one, and bills are going up, so we don't necessarily want to use it if we do have it. So it's becoming increasingly difficult. We're looking to run some courses to help people do that at some point. But there are resources out there that you can find to help you do that. And please just contact me, actually, because I feel very passionately about it. Like, I'd love to help.
Amazing. And I follow Jack Monroe as well. And she takes so much time she writes out for people that don't know, she writes out sort of her weekly shop and writes down how much her breakfast, lunch, dinner is, how much the snacks are, breaks it down, uses the ingredients that she buys throughout the week. And she shares on Twitter that she spends a long time doing this, but people say that it really helps. But she has consistently drives forward change as well, hopefully getting prices that she was seeing going up. So a really important person to follow. Ped or Carly, before we sort of wrap up, are there any other tips that you would give to someone who is struggling and wanting to reduce their sort of the budget of their food shop, but still cook home cooked food?
I think Izzy touched on some really good points there, and I think if you can, there are ways of how to cook better on a budget, but I think also think about how we're buying better as a society, and think about cooperatives, group buying. Perhaps there's the Cooperative Towns program, and there's something they do really well in mainland Europe is around cooperative buying in communities, and that's a really good way to access staples, produce at a much cheaper price, and that's something I think that we could all invest a lot more time in.
That's interesting. And what about you, Carly? Would you add any more tips to that?
Yeah, I think community fridges are great. Actually, long before I worked for Food Cycle, there's so much surplus food around, and generally a lot of community fridges, some will be donated food, but a lot will work with local supermarkets, etc. And it's just a way of getting rid of food, basically, that they can no longer sell. And yeah, so I think check out if there's one near you. I used to use one personally just to help with this fight and tackle food waste, but you can get amazing stuff from them and cook up amazing meals. So that would be my additional tip.
Great, thank you. Before we end, I'll just go around all three of you, and for people listening who want to find out more about your organisation, who want to get in touch, I know Izzy, you said you'd be willing to help. Where can people go to find out more, and is there anything specific that is going on right now that people should know about with your organisation? So I'll come to you first, Ped.
You can go to our website, feedingbristol.org. It's kind of not the most fanciest website in the world, but it will certainly tell you how to get in touch with us and what we're doing. We're about to launch the food quality strategy for the city, which I mentioned earlier. So in Bristol, we'll be having a food justice week on the week commencing the 20th of June, working with the city council on that to launch the food equality strategy and to hold several conversations around different parts of the city to really engage with people. So we really want to invite people. Those dates are going up, I think, in the next couple of days on our website and an Eventbrite for people to come along to. And the more people come along, learn about what's going on in your community, meet new people in your community. You'll get some lovely free food cooked by your local community organisation as well, and a chance to have some really interesting conversation and put some ideas down on some of the actions that we want to see in the city if we're going to start striving towards food equality.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Carly, what about you? Where can people go to find out more about Food Cycle? And I know you've mentioned about the volunteers that you need. Where can people find out more about those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it lots of times, we always need new volunteers. So yeah, on our website, foodcycle.org.uk, we've got lots of different volunteering opportunities. So whether it's phone calls, cooking, hosting, we have communications volunteers as well to help with social media. So there's lots and lots of different roles, loads of information on the sites, including videos and role descriptions, so you can really see what you're getting into. And as Ped mentioned earlier, we have lots of safeguarding, additional training, all sorts of things to make you feel comfortable about volunteering. So you can find all the information on there and kind of sign up. And yeah, our biggest thing at the moment is we're expanding all the time. We have 4 new locations opening just in the next kind of month. So we're in 49 already. So just take a look on the website, see if there's one near you, and we'd love to see you sign up as a volunteer.
Lovely. Thank you. And Izzy, what about you? For people who want to find out more and engage with Roots for Life, where can they go?
So our website is rootsforlife.org. But I think generally it's easier if you have access to Instagram and Facebook. That's where our main activity happens. You can sign up to our newsletter via the website, and that goes out monthly with new opportunities and the things that we have going on. We've got a community meal coming up on the 1st of June, and we'd love some more volunteers for that, as well as just generally, we are always looking for people to come and help. So yeah, please do get in touch.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, you three, all for joining us for this past hour and sort of going through. It's really interesting to learn from people who don't work directly in the organisations what's really needed and how people can give practical and help and engage in a way that is beneficial for you and the communities. So thank you for joining, and thank you everyone for listening. We have also been live tweeting this episode, and all the details of the organisations where Ped, Izzy and Carly work have been tagged on our social medias accounts as well. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.